Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me always is Ken. How are you doing today, Ken?
Exceptionally well. I'm so delighted to be back here. We've had a bit of a break from the podcast. If you listen to us in real time, we break for the academic break, and we are back with a brand new outline. So a new format for you today. We're going to be kicking off episode 197 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with a brand new section called Counselling Foundations. Counselling Foundations is going to be us revisiting what are the firm foundations of a counselling practice. We're going to be looking at theories. We're going to be looking at skills. We're going to be looking at practice techniques that underpin counselling. Back to basics is another way of saying that, but it's more the foundations, great for students, but also great for a qualified practitioner. And in that brand new section today, we're going to be looking at academics of being a counsellor and how we come across that academic requirement time and time again. We then go into another brand new section called Focus on Self, where we recognise that as practitioners, we ourselves are the very heart of our practice. Whether we work in private practice, whether we're a student in placement, whether we are working within an agency, it is us. We are the practice. Who are we within that practice? How do we care for ourselves? And today, in Focus on Self, we're going to be asking the important question, who are you in your practice? And then we're going to be ending episode 197 with a favourite section called Practice Matters, where we dip our toe into the world of what it's like to practice as a psychotherapist. We look at different areas of that, and we have an expert, Amy Launder, who's going to be speaking about counselling those with moral injury. Really interesting topic. I think you're going to enjoy that. But we're going to kick off episode 197 with those counselling foundations, Rory. Speaking about academics, we kind of revisit them again and again.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're just such a part of counselling life, aren't they? Whether you're, a student in first trainings, going towards becoming qualified, or if you're a qualified practitioner, maybe developing your professional formation, doing CPD or doing other courses, academic writing does tend to come into every aspect of counselling, and certainly, if you're doing any research, you're going to be reading people who've written academically.
100%. And it's interesting, when we were speaking about our time together as tutors and that we see in our counselling study resource, which is a resource for students, the word assignment or the word exam, it kind of turns the blood a little bit cold for many of us. And we now revisit something we've spoken about before, that the journey to becoming a practicing counsellor is maybe slightly different to a regular academic journey that might start off going into college, going, I want to be a such and such, going into university, continuing along that line and becoming what you want to be. With counselling, it tends to be that you go off and live some life first and come back to study. Maybe you've had experience in your journey that kind of leads you to wanting to be there and serve others. And when we come back, sometimes there's been many decades since there was any form of academic input, and it can be really daunting for students coming in. And then faced with kind of the academic lingo, which is very different to certainly when I was at school. I look at my daughter, she's 18, she's just finished college, going into university now, and the academic structure of the work that she has to submit, so different to the academic structure when I was at school. You're still taking the same knowledge and evidencing that you understand it, but if you don't understand the secret code, which is kind of the academic key, you can put that knowledge down, it still be there, but you haven't answered the question correctly and have that referred. It can be really tricky, and it's no wonder that it causes, I guess, a form of anxiety for so many.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think part of the difficulty that people face is that in our day-to-day life, we don't use academic language. We tend to describe a lot of things. So if you're writing a postcard, you might describe what you've seen. If you're writing a letter or you're on social media, you might describe something. But when it comes to things like critically evaluate analyse that type of thing, critically discuss. It's not something people do in their everyday life, but it is part of showing, certainly in the world of academia, that you understand the component parts of an argument or a theory. And for some, it can be quite tricky. And I also think that a lot of people come into training carrying a little bag with them, which is their experience at school.
Oh, yes.
You know, that fear of being judged or criticised, or, you know, one that I carried for a long time, not being as smart or capable of others. I remember sitting in my diploma class thinking, everybody's cleverer than me.
Yeah.
Every single person.
For sure. Am I going to hold the class up? Will I be academic enough? Will I be the one that stands out in the group? All fears that we've heard again and again and again. And we recognize that you're going to kind of, that would be maybe more expected for a student on a formal study to become a counselor or a psychotherapist. But we see the same in practitioners that have graduated over a decade ago. We offer continuing professional development. We also offer core training, such as our supervision course. And those coming in share the same kind of apprehension as we see with students of, you know, the assignment. That's turning my blood cold when I look to that assignment. And I guess for this reason, we've put together a little course. It's a mini course. Now, it's mainly aimed towards students that are doing a formal counselling qualification. And it is an academic writing course. So if you are a student, you're on a counselling journey, academics is maybe a hurdle that you would rather have a nice smooth ramp to get over rather than the anxiety and fear that sometimes comes with that, then go to counsellingtutor.com and on our main website you'll see how to access and get hold of that academic writing course. And I just want to kind of go through the structure of the academic writing course, because I think it gives a good indication into how to approach any academics we come across, whether that be in our studies, whether that be in CPD, whether it be in a further core training for your practice. And the very first thing, and I think this is an area where many slip up, is understanding the question, understanding what is actually being asked, Rory.
Oh, yes. I think that is, you know, having marked many assignments, one of the things that comes out time and time again is understanding the question. And I may have told this story before, but with fear of repeating myself, when I used to brief assignments in class, I used to say, you really have to answer the question. And I used to say, what colour is the wall behind you? And I think it was like a grey wall. And people would say, the wall is grey. And then some people would say, well, the wall is grey, but it's next to a window. And also it's got a skirting board. And also it's got a picture on it. And I said, that wasn't the question. The question was, what colour is the wall? And I think that sometimes it's really useful to look at questions and say, what actually is being asked here?
Yes.
What actually is being asked? Let's cut out what I think is being asked, but what is being asked. And a little bit of a tip here is get someone to say it to you, because it sounds different when it's spoken than when you're reading it off the page. It's just one of those quirks of you being human, I think.
I like that, Rory. It is, you know, when we read it with our eyes and our head is telling us the words that we're seeing on the page, we hear it in a very certain kind of voice. And we can, like you say, Rory, it sounds different if that question comes externally and enters through our ears. There's a different process that takes place. So yes, read it, but get somebody to read it for you, or you can use a screen reader. So PC, Macs nowadays, you can use a setting in accessibility. It usually is that, and select a piece of text and let that read it to you. And that's a great way of understanding a question. It's also really good when you've answered a question to kind of select that, get your screen reader to read it for you. And as it's being read to you, you just read over the question again and say, am I answering the question that is being asked? So if the question is, what color is the wall behind you? And you say, well, the wall behind me has got wallpaper on it, which has got quite a texture in it. And I see that there's a pattern on that. You're already not answering the question. You're talking about the knowledge you have about the wall, but not hitting that question. And that's one of the things that trips people up. Within the questions, sections, there will undoubtedly be the use of what are called Bloom's verbs. And Bloom's verbs are kind of the academic code. So Bloom's verbs, things like remember. What is remember? Well, if it says remember, you would show that you can recall specific facts that you've learnt. If it said understand, then you'd show that you can make sense of something that you've learnt. If the Bloom's word was apply, you'd need to show that you can use the knowledge that you've learned. So there's a difference between remembering, understanding, and applying. And they're pretty simplistic, but there's quite a few Bloom's verbs. They can get right through to critically evaluate, and they all kind of have a different meaning. And unless you have the decode or the code to unlock what they mean when they say something like analyze, so analyze is you would show that you understand the different parts of what you learned and how they relate to each other. So that's pretty simple if you've got that key. And I'm glad to say that in the academic writing course, Bloom's verbs are covered, and you get a lovely key of a slide pack that you can download with that as well. So there you have it. That's kind of the understanding the question. The next one is making a schedule, making sure you don't get overwhelmed or caught short right at that last minute, Rory.
Oh yeah, absolutely. As someone who was famous for writing his assignments at the 11th hour, my advice would be don't do that, and plan a scheduling, plan some timing, because we know neurologically that the more stress people get, the more the top half of their brains kind of switches off, and that's the part of the brain you really need when you're writing assignments. So give yourself some time. And also, maybe it may be useful, if you can, that everybody can, to find an environment where you're not kind of in the home, where you can go somewhere that's just very, very quiet. A lot of writers, one of my favorite writers, Maya Angelou, who's sadly not with us anymore, used to actually hire a room when she was writing, so she wasn't kind of have any kind of people coming in or asking her questions. Distractions is the word I'm looking for. So find yourself a space where you're not going to be distracted, and just start at the beginning and work your way through. But as Ken said, making a plan is really essential.
Yeah, and if you kind of doing that from a distance, so there's two different parts to the academic writing, the assignment or the piece of work that you have to submit. One part is actual writing of that and doing all the referencing and everything you need to do. And the other part is actually planning it. And they're two separate activities. And if you do the planning at a safe distance from the actual writing, then you can do it in a different headspace. Rory spoke about, you get there and you look at this assignment, you start reading over it, the heart rate starts going up, and you think, you know what, let me get out of here. I'm out of here. This is better left until after the weekend. This is because it's comfortable because you're kind of there and having to do it now. But if you're looking over the assignment from a point of view of, okay, this assignment has to be submitted on such and such a date. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign dates where I'm going to chunk this down. I'm going to do section 1 on this day. I'm going to do section 2. And you brief that without the anxiety of having to face the assignment. So that when you get into your diary and it says today do part 1 of the assignment, you've already got the directions of what you're going to be doing. You go, okay, pull up the assignment, have an allotted time frame that you're going to be looking at that. Really, really helpful. That planning can't be overemphasized. I know it sounds so simple, but it really is a key to reducing the stress when it comes to any form of academic writing. We haven't got time to go into every aspect of the academic writing course. If you're interested in that, go to counsellingtutor.com and the link is there. But we will just kind of end on references, bibliographies, because I think this is another area that can trip people up. And the nice thing is, when you're referencing, there are now tools, there are online tools that you can use that certainly weren't available when I was doing my counselling training, or if they were, I wasn't aware of them. But there are amazing tools, and my daughter was showing me the tools she uses for her work, and they are incredibly good. You can get Havard referencing from a tool where you just put in the source of the reference, and it kind of builds the reference for you, Rory.
Yeah, and it'll even build the in-text reference as well. So there's a number of tools like that. and they're really, really, really useful. And one tip I would give when you're thinking about referencing is when you get your academic books, you read them back to front. So what you do is, you don't read an academic book cover to cover. You go into the topic section at the back and you have a look and you say, this is what I'm looking at. I'm looking at empathy today. So you'd make a list of all the pages with empathy on, and then you can use your Post-it notes and pop those pages in so they're bookmarked. And then you can start reading, instead of reading in the hope, as I did when I was a student, that I might just stumble on what the question was asking.
Yes. Yeah. So there's so much help out there for you. If you are starting a new year, college, university, then we wish you all the best. Enjoy the process, enjoy the experiential aspect of training to be a counsellor or a psychotherapist, and manage your time around your assignments. Look to the academic writing course. You can have access to that at counsellingtutor.com, and we just do wish you well. And this is that new section called Counselling Foundations. We're going to be revisiting on our weekly basis, when our podcast comes out, different foundations that underpin best practice for being a counsellor and a psychotherapist. But we now move on to our second topic, which is focus on self, also a new area where we recognise that you are the centre of your practice. And today's question, Rory, for us to discuss, and we always say we're not the experts, we don't profess to be the experts in any topic, we're just two colleagues having a chat about different topics, and hopefully some people will find that useful. But we encourage you to continue the chat, and you can continue the chat at our Facebook group, and that is, go to Facebook, put in Counselling Tutor, and you will find us. Come and join thousands and thousands of like-minded individuals in having discussions around counselling, psychotherapy, the studying thereof, the practice thereof. And something that comes up so often is self-care. Who are you in your practice, Rory?
Well, this is a really interesting question, Ken. I always used to say to my students that I was pretty much the same person you'd see in the supermarket, or maybe the person you'd see sat drinking a cup of tea in the local tea room. And I think that I would try just to be me. And I think that's, certainly for people who are trying to build a relationship with a client, I just try and be myself. Although when I was looking at this question, I kind of thought to myself, I wonder if I'm being totally honest, because I suspect that I'm a little more thoughtful of self-disclosure in the therapy room. I may talk a little bit, if I was with friends, about what's going on for me. I'm all about focusing on what's going on for the clients and trying to get into their frame of reference. So I suspect that when I'm in practice, clients may see a slightly edited version of the person they may meet in the tea room, Ken.
Yeah, and I think that is fair, because we take on we're taking on a professional role when we're choosing to be there in the service of others, and during our training to become counsellors, psychotherapists, we learn about removing ourselves from the relationship, yet fully integrating ourselves in the relationship. It's kind of an interesting paradox there. So you don't want to be interjecting your own stuff that would interfere with the process of the client, but at the same time we're called on to be our true selves and fully integrated within the relationship. So I've always found that an interesting balance. But we are, I guess, we are exercising those core conditions. We are empathically listening, doing what we can, certainly in person-centered therapy, to be in the frame of reference of the client, but yet we are there ourselves. We bring ourselves in, and I recognize within my practice, if I have to ask myself, who am I in my practice? And we really do encourage you listening to this. Who are you in your practice? Ask that question. Say, who am I in my practice? Maybe there's some journaling there. Maybe that's some thinking time when you're driving. Maybe when walking the dog. Maybe when speaking with a colleague. When I look at who I am, I think I am many different versions of myself within my actual practice. And I don't like to say that. I'd love to say that there was a kind of a certain flavor of Ken that goes into practice and it's always the same. There's definitely an element of professionalism where I am showing up. It's kind of me, but me on a good day for the person. But I don't always have a good day. I can have a bad day in my own life. Life happens, we don't get a choice in some of the curveballs that life throws at us. You can have things playing out in your own life and need to set that aside and go in to be with clients. I recognize that there are times where certain parts of my life may still be with me when I'm with the client. Yeah. And the thing is, when I first started practicing, I used to beat myself up about that. I used to think that's not right. I cannot have. But the truth is, I'm human, and I am there as a human in an inter-person relationship, and I'm bringing me in, and I have to recognize that I bring in my good and I bring in my not so good. And it's about professionally holding that, I guess, and then weighing up, does that have a cost? And I think this is why supervision is so important. I think this is why self-care is so important, because it can have a cost. I recognize there are other times where I may feel elements of imposter syndrome around what I'm working with. And that's another challenge. It might just be a flash or a moment in that session, but I recognize that it's there. And yes, I can go, okay, I'm going to park that. But it's still there. It's like this little tiny little voice at the back there jumping up and waving its hands. So I recognize from myself, there's many facets to who I am within my practice. And I think there's also an idiosyncratic element to that as well, Rory, in that I may appear or present slightly differently depending on who is sitting in front of me.
Absolutely. I think that counselling is a made-to-measure service, and yes, I may be different in the therapy room, depending on who's with me. So if I've got a client whose mood is high and he's telling me about great success, I might be mirroring that. But also, if I've got a client who is really struggling, I may be mirroring that. You wouldn't want to be a client with a therapist and talk about something that's really difficult, and having a therapist laughing and joking and being animated. I want to pick up on a really interesting point about your outside life coming into the therapy room. One of the things that I know I do is I bracket off stuff that's going on for me.
Yep.
So if I've had really difficult stuff that's going on in my life, when I used to be in the room practitioner, when I got to my practice, I would make a conscious effort to say, I'm going to bracket that off for this hour or this block of time, and then I'll look at but making a promise to myself that I will look at it when that's finished. So it's not discounting it; it's saying I'm going to put it to one side, and when I've finished my practice, I'm going to look at it. I think that's important. And one of the things that I've learned through the years is the power of transference and countertransference. And, for those of you maybe new to listening, transference is when you meet somebody new and you take emotions and thoughts from a relationship in the past and project them onto the person in front of you. So a good example of that is you, given at the first part of our podcast, is you might meet someone who looks like your old teacher, and all of a sudden you feel quite ambivalent towards them because your old teacher kind of failed your assignments in the past. So I'm very, very thoughtful of transference. And the question I always ask myself, my self-supervisor always asks is, who is this client? Who is this client to you? And that's a question that my supervisor asks, who is this client? So I guess that in my practice, I'm more attuned to those things. If I go down my everyday life, if I go shopping in the supermarket, I'm not particularly tuned into transference and countertransference. I'm buying my tea bags, Ken.
Yes, I remember you sharing you're probably a little less empathic when you're driving down the motorway and somebody cuts in front of you than you would be within a counselling room. So it's still you're the same person, but there is a different way that you kind of show up, and within practice there is a professionalism. You're there for a reason. We're there in service of another. And it's interesting, Rory, when you kind of speaking about that parking lot where before going into the session you may go, okay, I've got this going on in my life at the moment that's not very pleasant. There's nothing I can do about it for the next hour. I'm going to put it in this parking lot here. And the important bit that you mentioned, Rory, is, and then I'm going to revisit it. Yeah. If that thought, if that feeling, if that anxiety, whatever you want to label, whatever's going on for you, is recognized, if it's seen and say, I see you, I'm going to park you in this parking lot and I'm going to come back. You're okay. It's less likely to be jumping around, waving its arms when you're in your session. And of course, that is when you kind of have something going on that you park. The other side of that is there a cost to that? If you've got stuff going on, have a think. Do I maybe need to go in and see a therapist? That's part of being a therapist, is seeing a therapist when you got your own stuff going on, so that we can kind of manage that and be there in service of our clients. So that's the one, that's the parking lot. The other one is something that kind of side swipes you. You're in a session. You spoke about transference, Rory. It could be transferential. It could just be somebody brings in a presentation that immediately links to something that might be going on in your life. And I'll just use an example. You might be experiencing troubles in your relationship, and a client comes in, and within the session, they start speaking about the troubles within their relationship, and it's kind of, you're kind of there. There's a link, and and you kind of, my stuff, their stuff. You can kind of feel it within you. There's a movement of whoa, what now? I need to tread really carefully here. I need to keep my stuff. So, putting it in the parking lot before you go in, that's one thing. Being able to recognize it within session and go, okay, I see you, I'm wrapping you up and I'm putting you one side, and we will talk afterwards. We will talk afterwards, my friend, so that I can be here in service of this client.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also something to be said about taking clients on and thinking about what their presenting issue is. I think if you're going through a very difficult time, could be a bereavement, could be a divorce, or the myriad of difficulties that can touch a human life, have a think about, can you work with somebody who is going through the same experience as you? It won't be exactly the same experience, but have a think about that, because, and I've said this many times in the podcast, we can meet ourselves in the therapy room.
Yeah.
We can absolutely meet ourselves. We sit in front of clients and you think, oh goodness, this is me. And I think when you're in that position, that's very, very tricky, because you don't know where you end and the client begins. You really don't. So be really thoughtful. And again, as Ken has really, really kind of focused on today, is supervision. If you're going through a very difficult time, take that to your supervisor in the format of, I'm going through this, I'm wondering how it's going to impact on clients.
It's the key.
It's the key. It's the absolute key. And there's no shame in that. I've done it. I've gone through some difficulties in life and said, I'm not sure I should be working with clients who present with this. Mostly, I have to say, bereavement. And my supervisors helped me work through it, help me understand where my trigger points may be. And in some cases, it said it may be wise, Rory, not to take on clients with that presentation for a few months and just see how you are in a few months' time. The greatest observations that I've ever had, really, in terms of practice.
Someone looking out for you and who you are within your practice, the who are you, being there for you. And that's what a supervisor is there for. Yes, they're in service of the client. They're looking at how you're working, but there's a restorative element to supervision as well, where the supervisor is going to be looking at you and your life and suggesting your own personal therapy if needed. And that is a safety net, because we sometimes don't see it ourselves. We get caught up. We just don't see it. There's things that are unseen to self, and it doesn't mean that you're not self-aware. It is a human condition. If you look to certain kind of personal development exercises like Johari Window, it clearly outlines there's going to be stuff that may be seen by others but not seen by self. Going into supervision, talking about what's going on in therapy, talking about what's coming up for you allows somebody else to see maybe what we don't see. Listen to your family. Are they saying you're looking burnt out? You're looking worn out? Look to your colleagues. Have professional discussion and personal discussion with your colleagues, and have eyes looking out for you there. We've got to watch out for one another. That's about self-care in counselling. That's about this new section. Focus on self, because we recognize you are the heart of your practice. And we've got a handout, because when you go into practice, you take yourself in your counselling process. It's called Use of Self in Counselling. It is a free handout. It was created by Rory. And if you would like to get a copy of Use of Self in Counselling handout, just go to counsellingtutor.com. In the very top menu bar, click on the podcast tab, navigate to episode 197. That's 197. That's today's episode. Right there on the page, click the download and get your Self in Counselling handout. So there it is, Rory. That's kind of walking away from the focus on self into practice matters. And I know that you recently met up with Amy Launder, who did a lecture for our CPD library. It's a really good lecture on a topic that's interesting. And when I was kind of doing my research for today's podcast, I was having a look at this topic to have a better understanding of it. Amy's speaking with you about moral injury. And to kind of give you an idea of what moral injury is, it's when you might be working with a client who's had to make a decision in their life that has had an effect, or there's been an outcome that has affected others that they are struggling with. And there's a really interesting dilemma. It's a hypothetical dilemma. It's called the trolley dilemma. And the trolley dilemma is about you are standing next to a tram line, and you look behind you, and hurtling down this tram line is this tram. It's out of control. The brakes have failed. You can see that there's no way it's going to stop, and it's heading towards 5 people who are working on the tram line. The 5 people working on the tram line cannot see the trolley because they have their back to it, and they can't hear the trolley. So if you shouted to them, they wouldn't be able to hear you either, because they've got headphones on because of the work that they're doing. That tram is going to hit them. And there is a lever, and if you pull the lever, it will turn the tram away from the 5 people that are working on the tram line. However, it will turn them in the direction of one person who is standing on the opposite tram line. And the dilemma is, do you pull the lever and through your will kill one person? Or do you do nothing and allow 5 people to die? And that is the dilemma. And this is kind of, it dates back to the 1960s when this was put together. And it was philosopher Philippa Foot, 1967, and then this was adapted by Judith Travis Thompson in 1985. But moral injury is, if you were the person who pulled that lever, how would you deal with that? And that's covered, Rory, in this discussion you had with Amy
Launder. Absolutely, Ken. And I think that moral injury is something that's going to be spoken about a lot. We've come so far from the original conception of post-traumatic stress that went into the diagnostic manuals in the 80s. And, veterans charities, medics, even in the case, people working in jobs where they've had to make a life and death decision, can have moral injury. And I was so looking forward to this lecture, because I think it's just so important to distinguish between post-traumatic stress and moral injury. They have the same root, but they're very, very different presentations, and therapists would work with moral injury in a different way than working with post-traumatic stress. And I think it's a term now that's coming of age. I first came across it in the kind of early 2000s, when I was just finishing training, 2004, 2005, in some American literature. I think it was an American website, but now it's become really mainstream thinking. And I think, if you're the person who's working with maybe medics, military, anybody, police, anybody who's had to make a life and death decision, then moral injury is going to present in your therapy room more often than not.
So let's dive straight into that interview with Rory and Amy Launder on moral injury.
Practice matters.
And we welcome Amy Launder, who has done a fantastic lecture for both the Counsellor CPD Library and the Counsellor Study Resource Library on moral injury. So, Amy, you're so welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
So, moral injury, it's kind of new in the vocabulary of trauma. What is moral injury?
Yeah, so moral injury was kind of born out of military research. So it's kind of very similar to post-traumatic stress disorder, but doesn't have all of the same symptoms. So it was kind of recognized that soldiers coming out of combat were experiencing negative symptoms but weren't meeting the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. And so that it's slightly different from that. It's when we have done something or failed to do something that crosses our deeply held values in a high stakes situation. So in a life and death situation, someone might be quite badly injured or possibly injured, and we've caused that, or we've not done something that we feel we should have done to stop that. That's where we kind of come across moral injury.
Yeah, so the idea that most people are moral and know the difference between right and wrong is breached in very extreme situations, and that gives people a traumatic response. So, are there any overlaps between moral injury and post-traumatic stress?
Yeah, of course. So the symptoms, sleeplessness, feeling guilty, self-medicating, those kinds of things definitely overlap with post-traumatic stress disorder. Where it differs is that with post-traumatic stress disorder, you get the hypervigilance, the flashbacks, and with moral injury, you get more of the shame and guilt and remorse and anger feelings as a result.
Yes, and I'm guessing that in terms of the military, that might present itself quite a lot. Because in combat zones, sometimes the rules of humanity blur or disappear completely.
Yeah, definitely, which is why most of the research has been done with military personnel or veterans, because it's just so ripe for moral injury. It's like you say, that the morals kind of blur, and you're in that context where it's almost normal to be taking someone's life or losing a colleague or things like that, whereas in the civilian population, it's not as common. However, with COVID-19 and all the hospital staff, it was becoming much more common in the last year or so.
I think it's really interesting that you speak about that, because I've heard lots of stories of frontline hospital staff. Staff maybe that didn't work in emergencies or A&E, doing other roles, being drafted into COVID wards. And and the impact of seeing people die and feeling helpless. And I apologise to anybody who's listening to this who's lost anybody, but that sense of not being able to do anything and feeling helpless, would that be a big part of moral injury?
Yes, definitely. It definitely comes about when you're being told by someone higher up that you should do something or you can't do something. So especially with COVID-19, when there was a lack of ventilators or treatments, and medical staff are having to choose who gets treatment and who doesn't, that goes against their deeply held morals and their values, and that's why they went into healthcare, and suddenly they're not being able to help everyone that they want to. And it definitely comes from higher ups. It's that helplessness feeling of I want to help but I can't.
Yeah, that sort of double bind, being told, or certainly in the military, ordered that you have to do something and you can't disobey an order without consequences, and it leaves people feeling like that. So how would a practitioner be able to discern if a client came in, the difference between post-traumatic stress and moral injury? Are there any kind of telltale signs that a client may help us with?
I mean, it's very difficult because they can coincide as well. So you can have both post-traumatic stress disorder and moral injury. Moral injury, I mean, it's very similar to post-traumatic stress, as we've said. Doesn't necessarily have to be life and death situations, whereas post-traumatic stress, it much more is that kind of thing. So strong feelings of shame and guilt, feeling like they're a bad person, that they're unforgivable for something that they've done or failed to do. Those are kind of telltale signs of moral injury. And you often get a lot of self-sabotaging behaviours when they're in counselling, because they feel like they don't deserve to get any better, because the way they perceived it, they've done an unforgivable thing. So they feel like they don't deserve your help.
Yes. Do you think there's a sense that people may think they may be caught for something, that at any moment someone's going to put the hand on the shoulder and say, you've done wrong?
Yeah, I mean, quite possibly. It obviously depends on the situation and what's happened. So if it's in a military situation, or you've been, told by higher ups in your workplace that you should or shouldn't do something, that probably maybe isn't the case. But it might be something, a car accident where someone's life has been, you've saved one person, but someone else's life has been ended, and those kinds of things, where it might be that they're waiting for someone to blame them for things.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. There is a video on YouTube, which is an interview with a sniper, British sniper, who held the longest kill record, if that is anything to have a record for. We'll put a link into that, and I think it really displays moral injury, because at one point after he'd killed somebody, he believed that he was going to be arrested at any minute, and it lasted for absolutely ages.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's even in military situations, there's always the stories of befriending a child or a couple of children who live in wherever they're posted. One day, coming up with a padded jacket on, and the soldiers have to, make the decision of whether they're a threat or not. And if they do end life and find out that they weren't a threat, then obviously that is something that will stay with them and cause some serious moral injury.
So if there's anybody listening to this, Amy, who may be listening and thinking, oh gosh, this feels really, really familiar, this is something that I'm experiencing, what help is available? Yeah,
so I mean, first of all, as always, GP, local counselling services. In terms of what kind of treatments are available, it's quite difficult, because the kind of traditional trauma treatments are normally CBT, trauma-focused CBT, which don't necessarily work with this population, because CBT is often focused on kind of changing the erroneous beliefs or the erroneous thoughts, whereas with moral injury, they're often not erroneous. They are, they have done something or they failed to do something. So it's more about accepting what has happened and accepting the feelings of shame and guilt and things like that, which so one of the best treatments so far that we know of for this is acceptance and commitment therapy, which is focused more on accepting the shame, the guilt, rather than trying to get rid of them, and kind of learning to live with them and building life based on your values around them.
Yeah, so trying to make peace with what you've done, as opposed to try and distract yourself or to rethink your way out of it.
Yes, definitely.
And I guess there's lots of military helplines and frontline helplines, and if we can find them, we'll put them in the show notes page for people to have for people to look at them, and maybe be able to get some more information. In the lecture, in terms of the lecture, what do you hope that people will take away from it? What would you hope that after people have watched this really good lecture that you've delivered, that people would take away from it?
So one of the main things I think is just how common it actually is. And even though most of the research originated from the military, it actually is, it can be anyone. There's obviously healthcare workers, as we're seeing, but also therapists themselves, journalists often as witnesses to horrific things, experience moral injury because they're not able to get involved and intervene, and they're witnessing all of these things. But with therapists as well, there's often, if you're working for an organization that is limited by the number of sessions and you have to discharge someone who's clearly not ready, you might, feel moral injury about that, or, there's all sorts of things. So just, I think how common it really is, and just being able to recognize it.
Yes, and to be able to identify it and work with it appropriately.
Yes, definitely.
Well, I mean, this has been a fascinating interview. As I say, the lecture isn't to be missed. And as you say, it's more prevalent than we may want to think. So, Amy Launder, thank you so much.
Thank you very much to Amy Launder, and for Rory, for taking your time to meet up with Amy. Really interesting topic. And so, what I like about that topic is it's something that can be adapted and brought into your practice right here and now. It's not a specialism area that you would have to go and work on. It's about understanding what may present and how to work with that. And I think that's the crux of CPD. And if you're interested in listening to Amy's complete lecture on working with moral injury, then that is available in our Counsellor CPD library. And if you want to find out more about the Counsellor CPD library, go to counsellingtutor.com. All the information is right there on the homepage. And there it is, Rory. That was episode 197.
Yes, and what interesting topics. We started off in Counselling Foundations, talking about academic writing and some of the challenges and some of the solutions that we can use to help us engage with academic writing. In Focus on Self, Ken and myself had a interesting discussion about who you actually are in practice. What facets of self do you bring, and what facets of self do you sometimes leave at the door, so to speak? And then finally, in Practice Matters, we spoke about moral injury, and of course that fabulous lecture that Amy Launder delivered for the CPD library on moral injury. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.